Good afternoon. My name is Alain Dubois and I'm Managing Director in MSCI in charge of index development. The important thing to say about MSCI first is that we are doing mostly equity indices. So they are very simple in some sense indices because they use data that are published by stock exchanges. They use data of listed stocks and they are just weighting of these listed stocks. So they are quite simple indices. We are publishing 160,000 of these indices every day. So, and we have absolutely nothing to do with LIBOR. We don't do this type of indices. We have nothing. We don't do also commodity indices. We don't do FX, so we are absolutely outside, I would say, all these things, but these regulations apply to us, and so we have to make everything we can not to be a sort of collateral damage, I would say, in this type of regulation. Where is it? Sorry. Okay. The first thing I would like to say, I would like to have a positive note about indices because, one of the major things we have seen since like 50 years is the development of indexing all over the world. It's a major phenomenon, and it's a phenomenon that goes towards more transparency and cost efficiency of markets. That's a very important thing. This is really what we do every day. Our business is transparency. What I'm doing every day is trying to develop some indices to create more transparency to some new markets, from emerging market to frontier markets, to large cap, to small cap, to micro cap, all these things. They create more and more transparency to markets and cost efficiency. Without indices, we'll not be able to separate alpha and beta. And one of the major things that has happened in investing is this capacity to replicate beta at a very low cost. And we have seen the development of the markets like ETFs and all these things. And it's only the beginning, this. So I tend to think that we should be, regulators should like us, in many ways, because we are providing exactly what regulators in the world want to do. They want to go towards more transparency. It's exactly what the index industry is bringing. At the same time, it's a very small industry in many ways, compared to banks, asset managers. We are quite small. Altogether, in the index business, we may represent a few thousand people, and maybe 10,000, but we have nothing to do with the big banks, the million people that are in banks or asset managers. We are a small industry, but I think we are very critical, and it's very important that the regulator understand our issues because we are very key to the transparency of these markets. Now, the point is indices and indices. I said there are indices and indices. We always talk of indices, but we have to take care of the fact that all indices are not equal. Anybody can make an index on a small spreadsheet and say, I will do this index and post it on the web, and then I have an index, and anybody can use it. But you can do much better than that. In MSCI, we have 150 research people in the index business. They are working every day to do some important things. Even dealing like corporate events is something that are using a lot of teams. We have 150 people also in data, IT. All these things are very important. If you want to build strong indices, robust tools for the industry, then you have to put a lot of resources. Otherwise, it will not work. You will have some weak indices, and it is very important to have such indices. Innovation is also very important. Our research is appreciated by our investors because of all this innovation and research that goes with it. An important point also, which is not always very understood, is that the index business is a data business. Basically, what we are doing is getting some license to use some data, then transforming them and licensing our clients to use this data. We are a data business. We buy data, we sell data. This is a business that relies for it to work on the intellectual property on this data. And there is no other way for an index provider to be paid than just to be rewarded for the intellectual property on its data. So intellectual property is key. And in what we see in this draft regulation, there are a few things that are completely orthogonal to intellectual property rights. I mean, if you ask us to publish all our data every day, all the data, all the input data of our indices, and this is Article 16. Well, first, I don't see very much which public interest we serve by publishing that. If we take the whole industry, you must have more than 1 million indices, published every day. If we have to publish on this million of indices, I don't know, at least 1,000 data for each index, it means publishing a billion of data every day, and I don't see very much how people will use that, how the retail investor will use this billion of data that are posted somewhere every day. I mean, I don't understand the public interest that it serves, but what I understand is that it infringes very much on our intellectual property rights, and that's a big deal. In this we have nothing against regulation, of course. We have nothing against regulation of governance. We have already a very strong governance principle, very strong Chinese wall, very strong compliance rules. But there is something that is not possible, which is to say you should not be paid for the data that you produce. Just like, I mean, we can regulate asset management easily. There are plenty of things that can be regulated, but we cannot say asset managers should not receive any management fee, or they should publish all their portfolios every second so that anybody can reproduce what they do for free. You cannot do that in the asset management industry, and this is not done. Nobody has proposed that in the asset management industry, and that's more or less the same. Now let's go to more details about the draft EU regulation. First, as was said by Pierre, and I just want to repeat what he said, it looks like very much this regulation, this draft regulation, has been made having in mind LIBOR and this type of indices, which are very different from mainstream indices, I would say, because they are made with contributed data and there are plenty of differences. So it's like it's one index out of 1 million at least, and it's not necessarily applicable to all these million indices. So there are several issues. One, for example, is the scope. I mean, there's something I don't really understand, which is why the scope should include an index. I mean, you understand when an index is the underlying of a financial product. You understand that there is a regulation of the underlying index because of a financial product that links to this index. But why should we also include in the definition of benchmarks the fact that you use this data to compare the performance of a fund? This is something that strikes me as necessary, especially taking into account the fact that you have already the market abuse directive and regulations. I mean, we completely support the inclusion of benchmark in this market abuse framework. We have always been supportive. So that should be appropriate to regulate the information that is provided, as long as an index is just information. For the sake of time, I would say a few words about Article 5.1 that has been proposed recently. I think that reducing the scope is an idea that is fine, but it should not create an uneven playing field between players. You can have you can restrict the scope to some players, but it would not be appropriate to exclude some players and not others. I think there should be a level playing field. All type of index providers should be treated the same, whether this is self-indexing, whether they are small players. You know, you have more and more of this type. I mean, this is a very competitive business. You have a lot of competition, and you have a lot of different business models that are competing. You have also a lot of self-indexing in this industry, meaning an asset manager is creating his own index and is replicating himself in this index. And that's very important, but it's treated fairly. I mean, I don't see why, in such case, self-indexing should be treated differently. And that's. And then there is Article 16, which we see as very important, because as I said before, it creates an intellectual property issue. And I mean, there have not been in the proposal very strong, I would say, impact assessment. I mean, the impact assessment, in what I have seen, was limited to the administrative cost. But I mean, we could imagine what would be the impact of such measure that would create problems for intellectual property. I think one of the main effects would be a massive development of self-indexing. You know, if you cannot be paid directly by being paid for the data that you produce, you will have some alternative models that will be put in place. And if you cannot be paid directly, you can be paid indirectly. For example, if you build an index and replicate it, and if you are an asset manager, you can be paid just through the asset management fees of the fund. You don't have to be paid for the index, because to be paid to yourself. So you can do an index, you can replicate this index with your fund, and be paid through your fund. And it's the effect of this type of regulations will very likely create a strong incentive towards self-indexing, a massive self-indexing, and it's a little bit a paradox. I mean, I have nothing against self-indexing to the extent that it's treated just the same, with a level playing field. But from the standpoint of regulators, having a sort of massive development of self-indexing, is it a good idea? You know, because some arguments that self-indexing is creating more type of conflict of interest issues than classical indexing. So, if it's the case, this is probably some form of the unintended consequence of infringing on intellectual property rights. Now I would like to go to the other issue that has been mentioned by Pierre before, which is the international framework. There is the IOSCO principle. The IOSCO principle, I mean, we will implement them. We are in the process of implementing them. I think they are reasonable. But the EU draft regulation is obviously going much further, much way beyond the IOSCO principle on some major issues. And that is a problem, you know, that is a problem because what has been the US framework at the moment, the US regulatory framework, it seems, and I will not go back to, I mean, Pierre has mentioned that with many details before, but in the US it's basically the IOSCO principle have to be implemented, and they are implemented through the regulation of the financial products that link to these indices. If in Europe we go further than that, if we ask for some mutual recognition, for some recognition of equivalence, then I don't see how it can work. You know, I mean, if as long as it goes beyond IOSCO principle, and if the US stay with the IOSCO principle, then what will happen? I mean, so this is a fundamental issue. But I think that in the proposed amendments by Sharon Bowles, there are some significant modifications